The truth is, anyone who actually wants a safe, comfortable life and a real shot at the American dream, you're better off living in a red state like my free state of Florida than in Los Angeles or the state of our next guest. Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, a great state, a red state, joins us. He, too, was going back and forth with Gavin Newsom on Twitter today. He just texted me and asked me if I was going to cover what he had to say, and I said, sure, but I'll fact check you, as I always do. He has time to be sending posts back and forth between me and him and you and him, and he's on podcasts, and he's doing MSDNC and local media bashing Trump. And meanwhile, you know, in full denial of what's been going on in his city and what the damage that has been caused by his sanctuary state policies. What's your reaction?
Well, I mean, here's a guy that has a state that underneath his reign as governor has lost 3 million people leaving the state. They rank #1 in murders in the nation. They have #1 cost of living, high cost of living. They have the #1 highest prices in the nation. And you're sitting here.
If you hang on, let's listen in on Gavin Newsom, then I'll give you a chance to respond first. I don't think we have any volume. All right. I guess we have no. Is that on their end or is it on our end? I'm asking. That's on their end. Apparently a live feed. He's having a little bit of difficulty, Markwayne Mullin. If you have time for podcasts and MSDNC and to fight me on X and you on X, I think you're kind of missing the point. Or if you put handcuffs on police.
He absolutely is, Sean, but this is part of the best thing that could happen to him. He's having audio difficulties, but it shows how bad the state's being ran, too, right? The guy absolutely should be thanking President Trump right now for trying to restore an order, because the only thing Governor Newsom is good at right now is sucking at being #1, at being terrible governor. I mean, that is it. The guy has literally has ran California into the ground. I mean, here California is a beautiful state, but at the same time, they have poor leadership. I mean, look, they gave us Kamala Harris. They gave us Mr. Fang Fang himself, Swalwell, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff. And you're thinking, what type of leadership do they have there on the west coast of California? Because things are going completely backwards. Why isn't California thriving like the rest of the country? Well, because they have a blue state ran by woke DEI agenda that doesn't support law and order. And thank God we have a president that's willing to stand up for the people of Los Angeles, even if they may not have supported him.
All right, I'm talking to my control room, and they're telling me that there's no audio available. I'm trying to put Gavin Newsom up. We can show a shot of it again. I'd like to carry it for people. I'd like to hear him again excoriate Donald Trump and blame Donald Trump. Oh, it just went down completely. I mean, you can't make this up.
You can't. You can't make this up.
You really can't. He wanted me to cover it. He texted me. I'm like, sure, I'll cover it, but if you're giving out false information, I'll fact check you. But here's the sad part to me, and I said this in my final exchange with him, that to me, he's put his own blind political ambition over the safety of law enforcement and the safety of the law-abiding people in Los Angeles in this case, but in his state. Sanctuary, city, and state policies put handcuffs on cops. They can't do their job. They can't help ICE. Look at the people that I went through in my opening monologue, the people, the worst of the worst, as ICE has been saying and the administration has been saying. You know, you're looking at murderers, gang members, child molesters. Why would you fight to keep those people in your state? I don't want people like that in my state of Florida. Get out. Why would you do that? And I'm scrolling the failure of California, the victims, you know, the criminal history of people in California. Gavin, have you ever called these people, these families, and said you're sorry or said, I'm going to fix this? The answer is no. We'll keep scrolling. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, you sit there and you think about what he's doing. He's just auditioning to be president, right? But they've got so far to the left that they can't come back to the center. Even when President Trump is trying to support them at restoring law and order, they have to be anti-Trump, because that's where the Democrat base is at. It's anti anything that Trump supports, no matter how right or how good it is for even their state. You're talking about leadership, like you said. Has he called any of these victims that's been victims of these criminals that have been breaking the law because they've created a sanctuary city? At the same time, I want to make the comparison. President Trump, underneath his presidency, unfortunately, in his first presidency, we lost some men and women in uniform in Oklahoma. There wasn't one single family that I reached out to that President Trump hadn't personally already reached out to and offer them almost everything. I don't want to get into it because some of it President Trump probably wouldn't like me to talk about because he's kind of private in that nature. But the fact is, President Trump always leads from the front. He's willing to do what is right regardless of what other people may think of him and regardless of even what their party affiliation is. And he's showing it right here, too, even with the National Guard, Sean. Let me just go through this. Yeah. The Democrats are absolutely going through and throwing a fit that he's mobilized the National Guard. But we realize that Eisenhower did this in 1957 when they had a racist governor in Arkansas that had mobilized the National Guard to prevent, he wanted to prevent segregation, and Eisenhower took over the National Guard to actually enforce desegregation. This happened again when President Kennedy in 62 and in 63 underneath the same circumstances, but it happened in Mississippi and Alabama, and President Johnson did this in 75 when he activated the National Guard. All this is what? To protect people's civil rights. Let's look what's happening right now in California. People's civil rights are being destroyed because San Francisco, L.A., and California wants to become a sanctuary city and state and allow illegals to do just what they're doing right here. And President Trump isn't having it. He's going to stand up for people. Period.
See, I blame the left because what they have done, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, you're the lawmaker, the same question I asked Senator Kennedy. When you institutionalize lawbreaking by giving sanctuary status, and with that, for example, in California comes, you get a free education, you get free health care, et cetera. When you institutionalize it, when you prevent cops from even asking somebody's status, then you are institutionalizing lawbreaking, or where I come from, maybe not from out there, that would be called aiding and abetting lawbreakers. How is it not aiding and abetting if I'm wrong?
You're 100% correct. You're encouraging bad behavior. We say this all the time in our family. A thief isn't just born that way. A thief takes the first opportunity to become a thief. When you allow criminal activity to take place just by a little bit, by ignoring the simple fact that you're in the country illegal, you encourage additional bad behavior. And they may just start stealing your bubble gum, and eventually they're going to grow into a more serious situation to, unfortunately, where we see rape and murder. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it is what's happening in these cities. And anybody could have saw this happening. We could have saw this moving forward because it was bubbling.
Stay right there. Sir. Here's Gavin Newsom. They finally got his feet up, I hope.
I want to be clear about this. If you incite violence or destroy our communities, you're going to be held to account. That kind of criminal behavior will not be tolerated. Full stop. Already more than 220 people have been arrested, and we're reviewing tapes to build additional cases, and people will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Again, thanks to our law enforcement officers and the majority of Angelenos who protested peacefully, the situation was winding down and was concentrated in just a few square blocks downtown. But that's not what Donald Trump wanted. He again chose escalation.
It went dead again. But Markwayne Mullin, notice what he does. He's blaming Trump. Law enforcement can't even ask if they're in the country legally. I mean, that's the unbelievable thing to me.
You know, I never fired.
By the way, he needs a tech operator.
He does. And Sean, I was going to say that I've never fired anybody for making a mistake. I fired a lot of people for not admitting he made a mistake. Gavin Newsom needs to be fired as governor. There is no way this guy should be running that state.
Well, I will tell you this. I think. All right, let's listen to him. Let's dip in again.
Trump is pulling a military dragnet all across Los Angeles, well beyond his stated intent to just go after violent and serious criminals. His agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses. That's just weakness masquerading as strength. Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities. They're traumatizing our communities. And that seems to be the entire point. California will keep fighting. We'll keep fighting on behalf of our people, all of our people, including in the courts. Just yesterday, we filed a legal challenge to Donald Trump's reckless deployment of American troops to a major American city. Today, we sought an emergency court order to stop the use of the American military to engage in law enforcement activities across Los Angeles. If some of us could be snatched off the streets without a warrant, based only on suspicion or skin color, then none of us are safe. Authoritarian regimes begin by targeting people who are least able to defend themselves, but they do not stop there. Trump and his loyalists, they thrive on division because it allows them to take more power and exert even more control. And by the way, Trump, he's not opposed to lawlessness and violence as long as it serves him. What more evidence do we need than January 6th? I ask everyone, take time, reflect on this perilous moment. A president who wants to be bound by no law or constitution, perpetuating a unified assault on American traditions. This is a president who in just over 140 days has fired government watchdogs that could hold him accountable for corruption and fraud. He's declared a war on culture, on history, on science, on knowledge itself. Databases, quite literally, are vanishing. He's delegitimizing news organizations, and he's assaulting the First Amendment. And the threat of defunding them, at threat, he's dictating what universities themselves can teach. He's targeting law firms and the judicial branch that are the foundations of an orderly and civil society. He's calling for a sitting governor to be arrested for no other reason than to, in his own words, for getting elected. And we all know this Saturday, he's ordering our American heroes, the United States military, and forcing them to put on a vulgar display to celebrate his birthday, just as other failed dictators have done in the past. Look, this isn't just about protests here in Los Angeles. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about all of us. California may be first. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other democracy are next. Democracy. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment has arrived.
All right, we have apparently more audio problems and more of the feed problems with Gavin Newsom. Markwayne Mullin, while he was doing this and trying to blame Donald Trump for pretty much anything and everything that's ever gone wrong in history, it's interesting because I scrolled the names of victims of violent crime. I'm scrolling it right now in California. And in multiple private texts and publicly in my battle and my fight with him on X, because he had nothing better to do but to respond to both of us on X, in every single case, what about the people murdered, Gavin? What about the people raped? What about the victims of violent crime? What about the big lie that they told us the border's closed, the border's secure? What about all of that, Gavin? He never addresses any of these issues. He is not keeping law enforcement or the people in his state, the people in these sanctuary states and cities safe. That's the problem. And law enforcement, again, has their hands tied. I mean, we see this now spreading. Is he going to blame Donald Trump for what's happening in New York City? Or is it the fact that the left in America wanted wide open borders, supported wide open borders, lied about wide open borders, and they're still championing the rights of the illegals over the safety of Americans? Which is it?
Well, this goes back to what I was saying right before he started again. He can't admit he made a mistake. That's why he needs to be fired. Let's unpack a few things that he said there, right? Like he said that President Trump just wanted to escalate it. He forgets to remember that the chief, LA police chief, literally said he was overwhelmed and he needed help. Let's not forget about that part. And then when he talked about the parade that's going to happen on June 14th, which is this Saturday, he says it's president's birthday, which it is. It's also my anniversary, by the way, 28 years. But he also forget to tell you it's the Army's birthday and it's Flag Day. So let's forget about the details, and just as long as it meets your narrative, he's such a liar that you can't believe anything he's coming out of his mouth. And can you believe this guy actually thinks he can be president of the United States? He may actually be worse than Joe Biden if he were to get elected president of the United States.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyway, we appreciate your time, Markwayne Mullin. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.